Here's a book I think every one of us should have if we're interested in dialoguing with non-believers. The Canon of Scripture by F.F. Bruce, one of the last works he put together when he was already, I think, close to 80 when he compiled this in the late 1980s. And he obviously thought it was a very important subject then, because there was a lot of confusion about the creation of the Christian canon. In the book, in the first 10 chapters, he's dealt with some of the historical background of the books themselves and the early response to the books as they were created. And he's also dealt in a prior chapter with the first heresies that we have a lot of record of, and those were the heresies of Marcion and Valentinus, which went in a Gnostic direction. And now he's talking in chapter 11 about the response to these heresies, because the impression you have, if you're a Jehovah's Witness or someone else who believes that somehow the church went apostate in the 2nd century, is that the church was taken over by heretics. Therefore, the entire church became apostate. But here, Bruce responds to that mistake by talking about the Catholic response to these early heresies. He says, and here's his subhead, the chapter heading being the Catholic response. The subhead is a Catholic collection. Both Marcion and Valentinus presented a challenge to the Catholic Church, that is, to those Christians who adhered to what they believed to be the apostolic teaching. The communities to which many of those Christians belonged claimed to have been founded by apostles, and there had been no ascertainable shift in their teaching since the time of their foundation. The distinctive features of Marcionitism and Valentinianism had this at least in common. They were recognized as innovations. New light, if we're from a JW background. This, the leaders of the Catholic Church knew. Catholic Church, by the way, is small c in both cases. This, the leaders of the Catholic Church knew, was not what they had heard from the beginning. But their followers had to be shown where those new movements were wrong. If the teachings of Marcion and Valentinus were unsound, what was the sound teaching, and how could it be defended? In the Catholic response to this twofold challenge, what came to be called the rule of faith played a crucial part. The rule of faith was a summary of the tenets held in common by the churches of apostolic foundation. It is closely related to what is called apostolic tradition. R.P.C. Hansen describes it as a graph of the interpretation of the Bible by the Church of the 2nd and 3rd centuries. In the establishment and defense of the rule of faith, the appeal to the Bible was basic. In debate with the Valentinians and others of similar outlook, the interpretation of the Bible was the point at issue. In debate with the Marcionites, the identity of the Bible had to be defined. Where the interpretation of the Bible was at issue, there was a tendency to maintain that only the Catholic Church, again small c's, had the right to interpret it, because the Bible was the Church's book. But in the Marcionite controversy, an answer had to be given to the more fundamental question: what is the Bible? Marcion had answered that fundamental question quite unambiguously. The Bible consisted of the Gospel and the Apostle, which he promulgated. Was his answer right, or was it wrong? The leaders of the Roman Church and other churches that shared the same faith had no doubt that his answer was wrong. What then was the right answer? If they had not given much thought to the limits of Holy Writ previously, they had to pay serious attention to the question now. And sooner rather than later they declared their mind on the matter. We do not reject the Old Testament scriptures as Marcion does, they said. We accept them, as did Jesus and the apostles, both the original apostles and Paul. As for the scriptures of the New Order, we accept not one gospel writing only, but 4, including the complete text of Marcion's mutilated gospel. Now he is referring to the fact that Marcion's canon of the New Testament consisted of only 10 of Paul's epistles, and they were truncated, or edited by Marcion, and the Gospel of Luke only. And that was severely edited also by Marcion. We accept not only 10 letters of Paul, but 13, that is, including the 3 addressed to Timothy and Titus. We accept not the letters of Paul only, but letters of other apostles too. And we accept the Acts of the Apostles, a work which links the Gospels and the apostolic letters, providing the sequel to the former and the background of the latter. Tertullian argues that it was quite illogical for those who maintained the exclusive apostleship of Paul, like the Marcionites, to reject the one book which presented independent testimony to the genuineness of the apostolic claim which Paul repeatedly makes for himself. And that, of course, is the book of Acts, which is independent of Paul and affirms him. The trouble was, especially for the Marcionites, that Acts presents independent testimony also to the genuine apostleship of those whom Marcion condemned as apostates. The scriptures acknowledged by the Catholic Church formed, appropriately, a Catholic collection. They represented a variety of perspectives in the early church. Marcion's list, on the other hand, was a sectarian one. It represented one viewpoint only, not so much Paul's as Marcion's own. As Marcion maintained the exclusive apostleship of Paul, there were other sectarians at the opposite end of the spectrum who regarded James of Jerusalem as the apostle par excellence and deplored Paul as the enemy of Jesus' parable who sowed the tares of error among the good wheat of the gospel. But the Catholic Church and the Catholic Scriptures made room for both Paul and James, and for other varieties as well. Ernst Käsemann can write of the New Testament canon as bearing witness to the disunity, not to the unity, of the first century church. More properly, it bears witness to the more comprehensive unity which transcends all the diversities and proclaims the one who is simultaneously the Jesus of history and the exalted Lord. There was far-seeing wisdom in the decision to accept all that was thought to be truly apostolic and to see it as mediating through human diversity the one divine event. Now, a lot of conservatives are going to have a problem with Bruce's last paragraph about diversity in the New Testament, but New Testament scholars of every stripe, Catholic, Protestant, liberal, and conservative, are all in agreement that that's the case. There is a lot of diversity in the New Testament, and the canon, as it grew in the 2nd century, as it expanded and was confirmed, bears witness to the diversity, as Käsemann says here. We'll link to a video we did on the Catholic consensus that we noted ourselves through a study of not just the canon but the New Testament itself. There was a Catholic consensus, though, about the gospel, and that completely destroys the idea that there was a general apostasy at the end of the apostolic era. So the first video in that series on John 14 is on your screen, and we'll continue after Bruce's discussion of the way the canon was determined in the next segment.